Hi, everybody. Welcome. Uh, my friend today happens to be, I'm going to put my glasses on because that's more important. I got to be able to read at my age. Probably one of the most accomplished and award-winning producers in the history of the American theater. He is a producer, a general manager. Just to tell you a little bit about Manny, he was awarded 10 Tony Awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Tony Award. And I'm talking about Manny Azenberg. Hi, Manny.
Michael,
Thank you for
Michael,
joining. Thanks for joining me.
it's my pleasure.
Um, I I just realized we also have something else in common. Lanny, your wife, was the original stage manager for Cats, right?
That's correct.
Lanny, we have that in common because Jilly Lynn, may she rest in peace, in the 1978 to 1980, I had a television show in Holland, the Mike Burstyn Show. And Jilly was my choreographer. And in 1980, she told me, unfortunately, she can't do the next year with me because she promised a friend of hers in London that she would choreograph a new musical that he was writing. And I said something about Ketzelach, cats. I said, Jilly, you're leaving a TV show in Holland, my show, to go and do some experimental thing in London. She said, I promised him, and I know I can't go back on my promise. And the rest is history. So I was at the opening in New York for Cats because I had just done Barnum in New York.
That's amazing.
And we
Oh,
were
I
at
was
the
there
opening, and we
too.
must have met there at the party.
I was there.
And Manny was there too.
Oh, my God.
But I just want to say briefly, Jillian Lynn was wonderful.
Yeah.
She was amazing. She did the whole thing. I just have to say that.
She was, God bless her. She passed away. She had a good life, but
Yes,
she was a dear friend all those years. And
that's
despite her
nice.
fame and fortune, she never failed to respond to an email or a phone call. And about 2, 3 years ago, a film that I had directed in Israel about the Six-Day War was in Cannes at the Cannes Festival. And she gave us her guest house in Saint Paul de Vence. She had a beautiful villa there and a guest house, and she let us stay there for a week while we were. Yeah, she was just. I miss her very much. Miss her
I do
greatly.
too. She was. She
Well,
was
it's
very
good to see you, Lanny.
nice to see you too.
So, Manny, how are you coping? We are doing this Zoom during an upsurge now in the pandemic, in the coronavirus pandemic. How are you coping?
As our people have had an expression called Ein Brera,
Right,
there is no choice.
right.
At our age, you protect yourself as best you can, which is you wear a mask and you stay at home when we walk outside on occasion, and uh, and we pay attention to the rules. The statistics are extraordinary. I mean, what are we at? Almost 125,000
Today,
people
yeah,
who didn't make
125.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's more than the mortality in both Vietnam and Korea. And this happened in 3 or 4 months.
and the
So
alternative is something that we don't even want to consider. So we have to just be smart and responsible. And a lot of people are just not doing that, unfortunately. What concerns me so much as well, and I'm sure you, is the effect that it's having on our industry, especially the actors and dancers and the young people, the choreographers, the directors, the playwrights. What's going to happen? I mean, it's not going to be over soon.
no. And it's reasonable to think that it won't be over until there's a proper vaccine and then a period subsequent to that. And the contemporary dancers are going to lose a half a generation of their time. And that's, I think, inevitable. Also, frankly, there have been obviously many, many phone calls about what do we do. When nobody has any real idea. We don't know what it will be like when the scourge is over. And it's not nearly as important as people being in the hospital and those who are really being damaged by it. But what the theater will look like subsequent to a vaccine is mysterious. I think that half the shows will not reopen, and that's optimistic. And it will be a whole new world. And unfortunately, the theater has conducted itself sort of like Tower of Babel. Different voices, different interests, and never a focused interest for the industry. And now everybody's making noises like we should have a focused interest, but nobody's going to be able to do anything about it because the sacrifices are going to be serious. And I suspect it's until it reopens and there is the reality that there are, for example, only 12 shows on Broadway. I mean, people are going to have to start sacrificing. And this trip is going to take a while. It's going to take a number of years. Maybe something affirmative comes out of it, which is we reestablish plays on Broadway by reducing the costs to do a play. Maybe some people come back to the theater to reestablish it.
You know, what hurts me a lot is the young kids, who every year show up in New York with their dreams of making it, and thousands show up at auditions, and such a small percentage even get to be hired. And those that are struggling usually have a second means of making a living, and that's been taken away as well, whether they worked as waiters or at bartenders, and that doesn't exist. And it's devastating. And it's, well, at least we have the Actors Fund, which helps quite a lot. And I always recommend to people, please, if you want to help in our industry, go and help the Actors Fund, because they're there to
It's
help.
true. I don't think anybody's really objective enough to know what's really going to happen. And people my age, while there are generational issues. Life for these kids is different than mine. I'm not quite sure in how many different ways. I don't think there's any question that tastes have changed. I mean, some of the things that are successful, I wouldn't even look at. And most of the kids don't know who Tennessee Williams is. So there's a whole other world out there. And what will evolve? How much more of a theme park will Broadway become as opposed to a cultural center? I don't know what that answer is. Do I have compassion for those kids? Oh, yeah. And there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
Your world and my world was different. It was different. I'm not quite sure in the details, but you came out of a theatrical family. Most of us came out of a more struggling existence. So not a whole lot was expected, but a lot of these kids come from genuinely nice middle-class homes, and something more is expected. And those jobs aren't there.
I want to, speaking of, our backgrounds, first, we have something else in common. We were both born in the Bronx.
Absolutely.
I was born in Dr. Leff's hospital on the Grand Concourse. Only because
we may have been born, where was that?
I think it was around 178th Street, around that area.
I think I was born on like at 168th Street, but I don't really remember.
I don't either, because I wasn't aware when I came out
No?
that I was being born. But I have a twin sister, And Dr. Leff, eventually, I heard, was accused of running an abortion clinic. So it's a good thing I came out when I when when I did. Just tell me a little bit, for those who don't know, your background. You went to college in the Bronx.
I didn't leave the Bronx until I went into the Army. I went to high school in the Bronx at Bronx Science, and then I went to NYU, which had a campus in the Bronx at the University Heights, all men, 2,500 students, 1,200 engineers, 1,250 engineers, 1,250 art students. And then I went into the Army. So my first time really outside of the Bronx or Manhattan was in Georgia at Fort Benning, and then in the Pacific in the 50s.
And
So
I knew your uncle. I grew up on Second Avenue, which was the Jewish Rialto, the Jewish Broadway, and your uncle Wolfie Barzell, was a dear friend of my father's. And
yes,
I
and
remember him.
coincidentally, here's a picture of Wolfie. It was just sitting on the table in Skipper Next to God with John Garfield.
Wow,
If you can see that.
I can see it. What year was that? Must have been in the
It
30s.
was right around the Un-American Activities Committee,
Oh, wow.
probably in the late 40s, early 50s, something like that. Maybe the late 40s.
And
Yes.
the other connection we have is with your sister, because in 1972, I came out to Los Angeles from Israel to open an Israeli nightclub. And at that time, there was a synagogue that was being established called the Synagogue for the Performing Arts. Jerry Cutler established it, and several guys from, comedy writers from the East that moved to California. And Lee, your brother-in-law, Lee Rich, may he rest in peace. And
No, Lee Miller.
I'm sorry, Lee Miller, not Lee Rich, sorry.
Right. Lee Rich was somebody else.
Yes. Lee and your sister were members, founding members of the synagogue. And
I
because,
think she's still the president or something
yeah,
of
because
the synagogue.
I knew Hebrew and I could sing, they made me the cantor. And I was an honorary.
You're the cantor.
I'm the cantor.
You're the rabbi.
Yes.
It's like you were cast.
I was
It's
cast as
like
yeah.
show business. Yes.
I got to ask you something professionally now. First of all, I know that you taught at Duke University for many years. You were inducted into the American Theater Hall of Fame, but your relationship with one author specifically, and of course I'm talking about Neil Simon, and despite the fact that you had so many relationships with so many great playwrights, Tom Stoppard, Athol Fugard, Peter Nichols, Harold Pinter, what was it about your relationship with Doc Simon that
It's
made it
something
so
you
special?
understand.
What was it?
You understand it. He came from the Bronx. We all came from the same neighborhood. We all came from similar homes, similar mothers and fathers, the similar struggle. Neil, for example, people know Neil as this big, giant, successful playwright. Well, when we first met, Neil would say, when I was young, if we could move to Queens and I could make $10,000 in a year, life would have been spectacular. Well, you understand that. I understand that. So if you look at his plays, we understood where all this came from. On occasion, we didn't understand it. In a play like Lost in Yonkers, I don't know where he got the lead character from. But by and large, it was Neil and his brother and his mother and his father. And we knew what that situation, the fundamentals were. Not that I had anything to do with writing it, but the relationship was, he would ask me what I think, And I tell him when I was engaged or not. And I tell him I was at a moment when I'm not engaged. And he would nod his head. And we would trust each other. I wouldn't just make up an opinion. Also, the truth was we really met playing softball in the Broadway Show League. It had nothing to do with the theater. I was a ringer on the Barefoot in the Park team, played shortstop. Redford played first base, by the way. How do you like that?
Was it also a matter of trust between the two of you?
Well, fiscal trust, without question. We wound up doing 25 shows together? I mean, that's sort of unheard of. And we fought. We had real arguments, but never really questioning one's honorability with each other.
Artistic arguments?
Rarely.
So the
We had arguments. We would have arguments about the show. This show is no good. Let's close it.
Oh, okay.
But the artistic arguments, no. I don't have those arguments. You mentioned a few of the playwrights with any of them. The relationships were never tell them how to write or what to write. Just tell them whether you're engaged or not. And you have to be honest about that. The initial, I'll give you an example. We did a play called The Real Thing with Tom Stoppard.
I saw it.
With Stoppard, he's so intelligent, you're afraid to have an opinion because then you'll be stupid. So when we did The Real Thing, I kind of was hiding in the back of the theater. I didn't want to be found. And one day he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "What do you think?" And I just blurted out that 10 minutes into the second act, I was looking at the scenery. And he nodded his head. And 5 days later came back and said, "Is it better?" And that represents what our relationship was. I would never tell him what to write. I would just tell him whether he got my attention. And we were very straightforward with each other, even on plays that I didn't produce. He'd call up and say, "Come over and see it and let me know what you think." And I would say things like, "I like this play, I paid attention." I like this play, I paid attention, but I didn't care about anybody.
You know, I discovered something. You once said that I didn't realize that Stoppard was born Jewish.
Oh, Mike. He has now written a play which was running in London. You couldn't get a ticket, called Leopoldstadt, which is the Jewish ghetto in Vienna.
Right.
And in that play, which is a masterwork, 40 actors, Stoppard comes out that he is 100% Jewish. It's an acknowledgement at age 81. He found out, it's a complicated story, but he found out that his grandparents were Orthodox, that they died in Auschwitz in Treblinka.
Oh my God.
And that he had an extended family that didn't make it, and some survived, and the survivors told him about it. And the grandfather wore a kaftan. And so this great British playwright, Essence, is a Bohemian Jewish man.
But when did he find this out?
It's overt. He's acknowledged it in articles that this is who I am.
But he found this out in the recently, or did he know?
The story is, I used to kid him about it. You know, we know each other for 40 years, almost 40 years. And I used to kid him, frankly, that I'd say, "When they come for me, Tom, I'm fingering you because I'm not going by myself." And we would kid around, and I'd say, "You want to come with me to Israel?" And he'd say no. But it got extended, and it was funny. But somewhere along the line, he and his brother, born in Czechoslovakia. But he was about 3 or 4 years old when the Nazis were coming, and his father was a secular doctor. and the head of the shoe factory that the father worked in said, "Get out of here, the Nazis are coming." And they got him a job in a similar place in Singapore. So the mother, the father, and the two boys go, and he gets to Singapore, and the Japanese are coming. So the mother and the two boys go to India. The father will join them, and they never hear from the father again. 5, 6 years later, on the presumption that the father was dead, which he was, the mother remarries Major Stoppard of the British Army, who adopts the boys. And Stoppard grows up, when they come back to England, as an English schoolboy. Years later, Stoppard becomes Stoppard, the great playwright, and he visits the Czech Republic to Václav Havel, who's the president of the Czech Republic, who's also a playwright.
Great playwright, yeah.
And he bumps into people who say, "I knew your father and your mother and your mother's two sisters who died in Auschwitz."
Wow.
And the mother never said anything. This is like Madeleine Albright, where the denial is complete and no curiosity, nothing. And then when he starts making an inquiry, that's what he discovers. And it took him a number, and then there's a phone call from Scotland, the one survivor on a freighter says your father was on that freighter and it was torpedoed by the Japanese. So now he knows where his family came from. And the research is that there are some survivors in the family, and they tell him about everything. And at age 80, he writes a play about the ghetto, the Jewish ghetto in Vienna. And the people who lived in that ghetto, which he refers to in the play, just references: Freud, Herzl, Mahler, Schoenberg, Schnitzler, the playwright. There's Klimt, Kokoschka. Also, people not mentioned in the play were Billy Wilder and Fritz Lang. And Stoppard writes about, in effect, himself and his family in that ghetto. And in the final scene, there's a character that actually is him, who acknowledges that he loved being in England and everything else. And those who survived in the play remind him of who he really is. You sit there and you don't want to applaud. You just you have to be more respectful than applause. It's so good. And it's called Leopoldstadt. And then I started to do research on that ghetto. Oh, God, what information.
I want to read something about your philosophy as a producer. You once were quoted by the New York Times, and I think that kind of describes you and your success. Quote, "I am not a deep thinker. I'm not a writer, though I recognize good ideas when I see them. I am there to serve people. A producer creates an atmosphere, or tries to, that is genuinely comfortable, so the best creative work can take place. You try to keep peace because there are so many disparate groups within the theater. I guess that is your formula for success as a producer."
I don't think it's changed. I would like to think of myself as more intelligent than that implies, but yes, you have to read who the people are you're dealing with. So if you have Neil or Tom Stoppard or Athol Fugard, you understand them and you in effect service them, but there's no loyalty. Who is it? One of our forefathers, I think, said there's no loyalty without truth. So you try to be as honest as you can. You don't flatter. You're loyal up to a point. And then the truth has to dominate. and they respect it. So I think it worked because I still have that relationship with Tom Stoppard, uh, who, when he wrote Leopoldstadt, called up before they went into rehearsal and said, "I'd like you to read my play."
Hmm.
Yes, you understand that. When I hung up the phone, I told Lonnie, "You can keep all the Tonys. Arguably the most outstanding playwright in the English language living just called up the kid from the Bronx and said, I'd like you to read my play." He didn't say produce.
Greatest compliment you could get.
So, and Neil, we did, 20 something odd shows.
There's a word for
There's a
that.
certain trust that comes with it, an aesthetic trust. You know it as an artist that you're careful about who you hire as actors because they come with their own mishigas, and you tolerate it, and you try to find an equilibrium between their mishigas and their art, so that you get the best performance. And I would like to think that the shows that we did were sustained good, so that they were good 3 months, 4 months, a year later on the road, 2 years later. You paid attention to the details that you're supposed to, and you were not about your own self-importance or I'm the producer. This is my show. I never felt that.
There's a word for that in Yiddish. We call it Menschlichkeit. To be a mensch, and honesty. It's all about honesty, and that's what succeeds. You can't, it's like they used to say oilam goilam, that audiences are not very, intelligent. That's not the case. Audiences are very, very astute, and if you're honest and you entertain them, because basically we're in the entertainment business, whether it's drama or musical or comedy. If you're honest, they will respond, and if you're
Absolutely.
not,
They'll find you out.
and we're going through that right now in other ways than theater, as I'm sure you know. I wanted to ask you about Israel, because we met. Actually, the first time we met in person was in Israel, when you brought a group of colleagues, among them Jason Alexander, Jonathan Silverman. I have a picture of us at the Hilton raising a glass. What was it that brought you to the idea of bringing colleagues to show them Israel as it is on the ground? Because people read about Israel, they hear about Israel, but unless you actually visit, you cannot understand Israel. And unfortunately, a very small percentage, amazingly, of American Jews have ever visited Israel. The percentage is very small. What gave you the idea of
Well,
this?
one, my family were labor Zionists. We grew up with. We sat in the Bronx when the vote at the UN, whether there would be a state, the partition of Palestine. And we sat in the kitchen in the Bronx, and my father checked off the names of the countries as they voted. And it was arranged so that when the United States voted affirmatively, that would be it. And something I'm sure you will appreciate. So we got to that moment, and my father checked off the United States, put the pen down, and said, I'm only, 14 years old, and looked at me and said, it happened in my lifetime. You can say Lashana Haba, Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem all day long, but that's 2,000 years, but it happened. So that's the atmosphere we grew up in, which was not right-wing crazy. It was labor Zionism. And sometime in the 90s, Woody Allen wrote an op-ed piece in the Times condemning Israel during the Second Intifada. And when asked if he had ever been, he said, "Why should I go to Israel when I can go to Sweden?" Zug Gornish. So, and I was with somebody you know, Noam Semmel, who was the head of the Habima, who then was the cultural attaché here in New York with the ambassador, and we got into a conversation about anti-Semitism among the Semites, and my generation in particular, because people like Sid Caesar and Mel Brooks never went. And I would ask Anne Bancroft every year, Mel Brooks' wife, and she was ready to go every year, and Mel wouldn't go. And Neil Simon I had to drag. So, and I said that we should take people from the theater and go to Israel. Don't proselytize, no right, no left, no religious, just show them. And we went in the first year, people you know went. Mary Rogers, Bernie Gersten from Joe Papp's place in Lincoln Center, Jason Alexander. A lot of people went. And it worked. And we never had to do anything. You don't say anything, you just get passionate people on the left and on the right, Arabs, Jews, and you meet and talk to them. And almost every time you come away conflicted. If you started out on the right, you moved a little to the center, and if you started out on the left, you moved a little of to the center, because the Arabs have a point of view. And even the people that I don't like, the ultra-Orthodox, they have a point of view. You can watch Shtisel, you know.
It's coming. They're doing a third season, by the way. They just announced a third season of Shtisel.
And as we met interesting people, we kept them. And it didn't matter if they were well known or not, because the Americans have no idea of who's important and who isn't. But if you meet passionate people, so for example, early on we met the man who prosecuted Eichmann. There were two, Gideon Hausner and Gabriel Bach. Well, Gabriel Bach is still alive.
Yeah.
He would come and have dinner with us and talk about what that was like, that trial. What it was like to spend 12, and Gabriel Bach was born in Germany and spoke fluent German and was a Supreme Court judge. Well, you have dinner with a Supreme Court judge who talks to you about the details of Eichmann. It's an education in those 3 hours. You get something else. You get something you don't otherwise get. They're not just statistics. And how he personalized. We also, Shimon Peres came any number of times. And up north, there were two commandos, and there's an Arab in El-Fahim named Saeed Abu Shakra, and he would talk to the group also. And he was an ex-narcotic cop who's trying to build a gallery for Arab artists. So you humanize, and also you have some of the best food you've ever had in your life. And it's 8 days, and we did it for 30 years, sometimes twice, two groups back to back, and once or twice we did 3 groups back to back. So over the years, we took a lot of people from the theater on a trip, and no proselytizing. And you can talk to them, and Jason will tell you, Jason came back, Jason Alexander, 3 or 4 times. Jason wrote an extraordinary poem about Jonathan Silverman sneaking off to Lebanon, which he didn't do. There's a real history to it. And are you available for an extended story here about something?
With you, that's all I want is to schmooze.
Okay, so I told you about my father. At the bat mitzvah of my number 2 daughter, my father asked for everybody's attention and said that he realized that whatever his identity was, it would be, he's talking to the children, that it would be continued in ways he could not possibly have imagined. Because in his time, there was no such thing as a bat mitzvah. There was no such thing as a reform synagogue. And there was no such thing as a party afterwards at Sardis, which is what we did have it for the bat mitzvah. The last trip we made, which was last year, Jeffrey Seller and Josh Lara, Jeffrey produced Hamilton, is on his third trip with us to Israel. Jeffrey and Josh are gay and they have 2 children. And because of the success in Hamilton, Jeffrey contributed $300,000 to the Khan Theater
In Jerusalem.
in Jerusalem, which hires Arabs and Jews. And they named the courtyard in for Lonnie and Manny Azenberg. Now, 2 gay men, my father would be 125 years old, my father's name is now emblazoned in a place in Jerusalem. At age 125, he made Aliyah. And because of 2 gay men. And so my father's prophetic words that his identity would be continued in ways he could not possibly have imagined.
Yeah.
That the name Azenberg is now permanent in Jerusalem because of the guy who produced Hamilton and his partner Josh, who's a photographer. And they're good friends. So it's
The circle, you know,
yes.
the circle comes together.
When at the moment I cried. And there's a word, they put it in Hebrew, it's also in Yiddish. Hemshech, continuity.
Continuity.
And in the rock that is named, it says Hemshech, continuity.
Well, Manny, when this crazy era that we're going through is over, because I was supposed to be in Israel now, I did a series, an Israeli TV series. We just shot the 2nd season, which is opening, will start streaming in August. I can't be there, unfortunately, because we just can't fly to Israel.
We're supposed to be there now.
Right. So
this was.
Let's make a pact that next year in Mirz Hashem, let's go together and we'll go up and visit the Khan and make Aliyah to your father's memory.
I have a fantasy, is that we'll speak to Elisheva, who runs the Khan Theater, and they'll do the stop art play about Leopoldstadt.
Wow.
That would be you concluding the circle. When stop art comes to see it.
Has he ever been to Israel?
Yes, he wouldn't go with me. I told him that I thought that the difference between being an American and being an Englishman is that in America we have Italian Americans, Irish Americans, Jewish Americans, Swedish Americans. I said, I never heard of an Italian Englishman. You have to give up every identity to be an Englishman. You have to be an Anglo or Saxon. I said, so Tom, you're fooling yourself. And I said, come with us on the trip to Israel. He said, I'm not going with you. I will go. And he did go. He got an award with Amos Oz one year. He said, but I'm stealing one thing, Italian Englishman. He said, that's good. I like
that. Manny, we're going to do this again because I just love to talk to you. And there are not too many of us around. The Israeli.
When this is over, let's discuss it, and I'll meet you in Tel Aviv.
You got a deal. There's the biblical expression, "Kam dor shelo yada et Yosef." A generation has grown up that didn't know who Joseph was, and we have to remind those people who Joseph was, our Josephs. But there's always something.
Ledor vador.
Ledor vador. I like to conclude these meetings that I'm having with a question. Was there one person in your life that was your inspiration? If you could name one person that inspired you, who would it be?
It would be my father.
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah. There are people who have bits and pieces of one's life. Some people I knew in the military, actually. A colonel who was my regimental commander, who I stayed in touch with for 40 or 50 years. And he had an influence on me about honorability and loyalty. And his name was Ferguson, and he became a general. But I'll tell you that story some other time. But my father, because he said something you will appreciate. He said, "We don't lie, we don't cheat, and we don't steal." That's it. No more discussion. We don't do that. Then it resonated. My kids repeat it now. Thank God.
What's your Hebrew name?
Emanuel.
Emanuel. Okay.
Sí.
Emanuel. Yeah.
Yes, I invoke that every once in a while.
Exactly.
I tell people God is with us.
Exactly.
So this could be it, you know.
It's the
We trace our ancestry back to David, theoretically. And David was an ancestor of Yahushua.
You know who, yeah.
Yes. This could be it, you know. God is with us. That's what.
Well, Emanuel, I wish you good health and naches from your children. My motto has always been, and I like to leave you with this: carpe diem, seize the day. We should always be able to do that and see each other in good health and happiness. And we got a date for next year in Jerusalem. Shana haba.
This virus. Litrot.
Toda rabba. Love to Lenny.
Bakasha.
Bye, sweetheart.
See you soon.
Thank you. Thank you.